Rev up your engines! Now, if you've been watching me any length of time, you'll know I'm not a Mitsubishi fan. This is a 2002 Montero, all-wheel drive, and it is actually a really good vehicle, especially for the price it was purchased at. They're always decent-looking SUVs, but in the case of this one, check it out. Baby was made in 2002, and it was made in Japan. It's been to hell and back. His brothers drove it when he was in college and hit a deer, smashed into the garage, but it is still going down the road. Yeah, some of the plastic's broken off from whacking into things, but it still runs. And here's the biggest kicker of them all. He bought this thing 10 years ago for $4,000 with 100,000 miles on it. And now it's got 228,000 miles on it. So he bought it for $4 grand, put 128,000 miles on it in 10 years. He said he spent about a couple grand in repairs, alternator, stuff like that. No big deal. It still runs, as you can see. Now, sure, when you put it in gear, it's got a little bit of jiggle. You can see the all-wheel drive shaking a little bit, but not that big of a deal. The all-wheel drive still works. It still shifts like a dream. Now, as we look under the hood, it's got a Japanese-made V6 engine. And yes, it is a Mitsubishi engine. The company makes crappy piston rings. They always have. They probably always will. So it does burn oil. But guess what? Oil is cheap, and this is still the original engine with 228,000 miles on it. The radiator seeps too, you can see it. But let's take in consideration, this is the original radiator. And he's thinking about replacing them. Heck, you can get them aftermarket for 149 bucks or even less if you price around. They work perfectly fine. They're just plastic and aluminum crimped in. You can easily change it yourself. No big deal. Now, if this were a more modern Montero or any Mitsubishi, I wouldn't advise anybody to buy. As far as I'm concerned, the new ones cost too much anyways, but they're not as well made. The later model ones, I see the transmissions going out. I see the engines blowing. These old ones, they were solid built. The fact that this one's whacked into deers, ran into garages, it still works. They were solid built in Japan back in 2002. Kind of similar to GM if you think about it. You get an 01, 02 Silverado, could be a great truck, but the new ones, not at all. Their quality's gone down the hill, especially since they started getting a bunch of parts from Mexico. And in this case, where are the modern Monteros built? 2015 to present. They're built in Thailand, Indonesia, West Java, Russia, Bangladesh, and Chittagong, wherever that is. So they're not made in Japan like these babies are. And let me tell you, there is a gigantic difference in the quality of them. There's no arguing that. And since I didn't know, let's all get educated here. Okay, Chittagong is in Bangladesh. Now you know, not Japan, so it's really an Indian car, if you get one of those. Of course, most of those are sold in India. Now, as you can see, it's pretty utilitarian inside. Got a lot of seat room. And when we open the back, this one's got a big stereo system. And it also has some logs. Well, I guess if you really wanted, you could fuel this thing with logs. Of course, you would have to turn the logs into ethanol and then mix the ethanol with gasoline. But theoretically, you could run this thing on logs. Now, these aren't really made for towing, but this thing can tow 5,000 pounds. So you can tow an intermediate weight if you have to. So with 228,000 miles on it, you might think it served its purpose. Well, it's still got a lot left. Let's take it for a spin. Starts right up. Yeah, it shakes a little. Don't expect perfection on something this old. It still goes down the road. Now we can see the anti-lock brake light is on. It's because he disconnected it because it wasn't working. Don't expect that stuff to work on vehicles this old anyway. And it's still got the original shocks on this thing. All right, let's see if it still runs. You can see, yeah, it shakes a little bit idle, but no big deal. Well, let's step on the gas and see what happens. It's not a rocket ship, but you hear that engine go? It still goes. You feel those shifts? Even at full throttle, it shifts quite smoothly. It's not that loud. You can hear some air leaks here and there, but it's still a very comfortable, pretty high up in the air SUV after all these years. And yeah, he's got to put about a quart of oil in every 500 miles. But then again, oil is cheap, engines are expensive, and as long as you have a Mitsubishi and it's old, they all burn oil. I've never seen an old one that didn't burn oil. As long as you keep putting oil in and don't run it out of oil, they can still run quite some time. So you can see it still runs good, burns oil. Not a bad vehicle, but his headlights have been dimming on him for a long time. So let's check out the charging system. First thing we're gonna check is the battery. We'll hook it up. Gotta make sure they're nice and tight. You don't want them loose. 13.04 volts. this. We're going to check the battery. In vehicle, battery post, top post. It's a regular battery. It's not an AGM. Call cranking amps. It says 875 on the battery, so let's zoom it up to 875. 875, and here we go. Got a surface charge. We turn on the headlight, and it's above 32, obviously. Let's see what it says. Replace battery. Got very little power left in it. Now we're going to check the alternator. So we start the car. And it does various tests. We turn the headlights and the blower fan on, and now we're going to see what it says. We rev it up, and let's see what conclusion it comes to. It's normal. Now, I did notice one thing in the trunk, right? Here are these giant speakers for the bass, so let's turn that on. So now we're going to test it with the speakers going. As you can hear, he has the bass going, so let's see what happens when that's on. Testing it, it's done testing it, let's see what it says. Normal. So in this case, with the bass going, he thought maybe the bass was taking too much power, making everything dim. No, even with the bass running, it says it's normal. Batteries don't last forever anymore. Batteries aren't like they used to be. Back in the day, when they started to go bad, your car would start and then start. And it could do that for months before it stopped. Today, they'll start perfectly fine until one day you turn it and the car doesn't start. In this case, this thing does not have the cranking amps that it should have had. It just doesn't have the power. Now, it's been doing this for a while, getting a little bit dim headlights. It's nothing serious. It's a combination of the battery is somewhat old and they wear out. When you're only at an idle speed, the alternator won't put out exactly as much power as it's rated for. Now, if you wanted to compensate for all this stuff, at AutoZone, you can get a 100 amp alternator for this thing for like 175 bucks. But in the case of this Mitsubishi, you could get a 175 amp job that will bolt right in for about 300 bucks. So if you're really worried and you're going to play a lot of music and do a lot of idling, my advice, I'd replace the alternator with a higher output one. Then you won't have any problems at all. And then probably you wouldn't even have to replace the battery. But considering the age of this thing, that he only paid $4 grand for it 10 years ago and it still runs, so what if the lights flicker a little when they idle? I wouldn't go out and spend 300 bucks on a 175 amp alternator because it still drives and runs perfectly okay. The only thing you notice is a little dimming at night. That's no big deal. I wouldn't go through the trouble of changing anything as long as it starts up and doesn't have any problems running down the road. But for you guys with the big old speakers, if you're going to blare them out a lot, especially at idling speeds, or if you're planning on playing them with just the key turned on, buy yourself the 175 amp alternator. They bolt right on. Maybe they got a special order at AutoZone, but for 300 bucks, I'm sure you spend a ton more than that on the speakers. Because it's not like this was wired wrong. You can see the speaker system is directly off your positive battery terminal. Never put them in a fuse box. Connect them directly to the battery. Surprise, surprise, Scotty likes a Mitsubishi, but it's an old one. And it still does burn a quart of oil. Still a really dependable knock-around vehicle. Since it's all got bashes in it, you don't really care. You don't worry if somebody puts a little ding on the side of it. A perfect fun vehicle that you don't have to think about. And since I'm always giving you away free advice, I'm giving you away a free tool today. A battery tester. So you can test your own battery and alternator. If you have a chance to win, place a clean, non-offensive comment on the YouTube comments below, and a winner will be chosen randomly by computer so you can check out your car's battery and alternator and your friends' cars too. Maybe you'll start a little side business. And here's some bonus questions and answers. Carl Jensen 98 says, I was at an auction. I bought a Fiat Spider Lusso for $3,000. Car's from 2018, has 40,000 miles. Do you think it was good as a toy? I'm not a Fiat fan by any stretch of the imagination. As far as I know, that car was a joint project with Mazda and is more or less a rebadged MX-5 with a Fiat motor in it. They could be okay, but you said you bought it used at an auction. I'm not a fan of auction cars for one main reason. If a car's a good car, it generally will sell on its own, right? Why is it at an auction? Was it wrecked, flooded? If it was, you might have all kinds of problems. You're taking a big gamble buying an auction car, especially a Fiat auction car. If it hadn't been wrecked, you got it for $3 grand, I'd say not a bad deal, but you're gonna have to pray it wasn't flooded out. Because I've seen flooded cars, people bought them at auctions, and they didn't really act up for 2 or 3 years, but then they completely fell apart as everything corroded. Especially like where we were in Houston, where people would get salt water corrosion from hurricanes and the storm surge. Salt water destroys the electronics, but it can take years. So let's hope it wasn't in a salt water flood and that it will last you a while. So if you never want to miss another one of my new car repair videos, remember to ring that bell.